Medieval Europe did not only fear invasions, but the moment Viking ships suddenly appeared on the horizon, changing everything within minutes. These ships were light, fast, and designed to reach beaches and rivers before any defense could react. Unlike heavier naval vessels, they were highly flexible, capable of moving across open seas, coastal waters, and inland rivers that led directly into the heart of settlements. The Vikings did not rely solely on the ocean. They used rivers as natural highways, allowing them to strike deep into territories that believed they were safe. When villagers spotted the ships, it was often already too late to organize any effective resistance. There was no time to gather armies or strengthen defenses before the attack began. The psychological impact was as powerful as the destruction itself. The unpredictability of Viking raids created constant fear across coastal Europe, as no one knew when or where they would strike next. Their preferred targets were monasteries and poorly defended settlements, which were rich in resources but easy to overwhelm quickly. Viking weapons were simple but effective: light axes, spears, and shields designed for speed and close combat rather than prolonged warfare. They fought in coordinated groups, using efficient formations that allowed them to break enemy resistance rapidly and control chaotic battles. The shield wall was one of their most effective tactics, acting as both a defensive and offensive structure. Viking society was shaped by this lifestyle. From a young age, people were trained in navigation, survival, construction, and combat in harsh environments. Their longhouses sheltered families during extreme winters, reinforcing a culture of resilience and cooperation. Shipbuilding was the core of their power. Their vessels allowed them to cross seas, navigate rivers, and reach regions that considered themselves protected from naval attacks. Contrary to popular belief, most Vikings did not wear heavy armor, relying instead on mobility and adaptability. Beyond raiding, the Vikings were also active traders, connecting different parts of Europe and exchanging goods and cultural influences. Over time, many stories about their brutality were exaggerated by medieval chroniclers, amplifying the fear they already inspired. Eventually, many Vikings integrated into European kingdoms, settling in lands they once raided. What made them truly feared was not just strength, but speed, unpredictability, and the ability to appear where no one expected, making them one of the most formidable forces of the medieval world.
Push forward! Hold the line! Shields up!
In movies, Vikings look like walking tanks covered in metal, but most real Viking warriors never fought wearing heavy armor at all. The main reason was simple. Iron was extremely expensive during the Viking Age. Creating a full chainmail armor required thousands of forged metal rings and weeks of difficult labor, and that creates a detail Hollywood almost never shows. Full armor was usually reserved for wealthy leaders and elite warriors, not ordinary fighters. Most Vikings entered battle wearing wool clothing, leather protection, or only small pieces of armor. Instead of trusting heavy armor, they relied on something far more practical: the shield. And Viking shields worked far better than most people imagine. They were light, fast, and flexible enough to protect both the warrior and the entire formation. A strong shield wall could absorb arrows, block attacks, and move like a coordinated barrier across the battlefield. There is another detail movies ignore. Vikings depended on speed. They were raiders, sailors, and fast attackers who needed to strike before enemy kingdoms could react. Heavy armor could quickly turn a rapid invasion into an exhausting disaster. Vikings needed to row ships, jump onto beaches, run through rough terrain, and attack quickly before reinforcements arrived. That is why many warriors preferred protection only on the head, shoulders, or arms while keeping the rest of the body mobile. And those famous horned helmets almost certainly never existed in real Viking combat. The real purpose of a Viking helmet was survival, not intimidation. Large horns could catch enemy weapons and make close combat more dangerous. The farther Vikings traveled, the more important weight became inside their ships. every extra pound meant less food, slower movement, and smaller chances of surviving long voyages across freezing seas. But the biggest Viking protection may not have been armor at all. They relied heavily on aggression, surprise, speed, and the psychological shock of sudden attacks. Many enemies panicked before battles even became prolonged fights, and that explains why mobility mattered more than becoming a slow wall of metal. Even so, some wealthy Viking leaders truly wore full chainmail during major battles, but those armors were so valuable they could be passed down through generations. In practice, real Viking power was never about looking invincible. It was about striking before the enemy even understood what was happening. The Vikings did not create stories just for entertainment, because myths were part of the very survival of the Norse people. In a world surrounded by storms, famine, and war, legends explained forces nobody could control. Thor was not just a powerful god, because he represented real protection against the chaos of nature. And there is one curious detail almost nobody notices about the Viking gods. They could also die. That completely changed the Viking mindset, because even the gods themselves fought, knowing the end was inevitable. Viking courage did not come from the hope of survival, but from the honor of facing the impossible. And it was exactly this worldview that transformed ordinary sailors into the most feared warriors in Europe. But Viking myths hid another function, far more strategic than it first appears. The stories also serve to teach routes, behavior, alliances, and even survival rules at sea. Many monsters described in the sagas were probably born from real dangers, faced during unknown expeditions. And there is another important revelation. The Vikings almost never wrote their own stories during that time. Much of the history that reached us came through peoples who were afraid of the Vikings themselves. That means many accounts were exaggerated to turn the invaders into almost supernatural figures, but there is an invisible detail in the traditional records that completely changes this. Story archaeological discoveries reveal a people far more organized, technical, and connected than the myths suggest. The same societies that terrified kingdoms also mastered trade, navigation, and advanced naval engineering. And perhaps the greatest secret is that myths helped the Vikings maintain unity in an extremely fragmented world. The stories created collective identity among people separated by seas, mountains, and long winters. And the more dangers the world presented, the more important those narratives became for keeping society alive. In the end, Viking myths were not just fantasy, because they functioned as memory, strategy, religion, and survival all at once. And maybe that is exactly why, 1,000 years later, Viking legends still feel frighteningly alive.